Okay. So with stromatophiles, you have a couple of individual examples. Okay, you have, of course, a large macroscopic structure, which we still consider a protist, but it's a multicellular protist. The majority of it is diploid. So when you have, I know these aren't true plants, but when you have a situation like this, that it looks, obviously, it looks like a plant. It's photosynthetic, it's growing, and it doesn't move. It follows all the rules of what we would consider to be a plant, although it's still a protist. We're going to give it a life cycle that's very similar to what you would find in plants, although with a major distinction. The majority is what we call, the majority of its life cycle is spent in the generation which we call the sporophyte generation. It's diploid. And sporophytes are diploid. And the only time that it has a haploid portion is when you have the gametes. So this has a gametic life cycle, just like we do. The only free living stage is the diploid, right? And the only haploid stage are the gametes. So we're talking about fucus. Here is, specifically, we're talking about fucus, or bladder wrack. You can find this species in our shores along the, you go to Coney Island or Rockaways or Pelham Bay or to any of the beaches along Brooklyn, etc. You can find these. All right. If you look closely at a fucus plant the next time you go strolling in the strolling under the Verrazano Narrows Bridge or in Coney Island, and you say, "Oh, look, this is what they talked about in Bio 106." You have, oh, this must be the thing that's fucus. You'll notice that it has dichotomous branching. Dichotomous branching. So whenever it splits, it always splits into two branches, not three, not four, or fives, always twos. So here it's split once and twice. Here it's split once, twice. Here it splits once, twice. Okay, that's dichotomous branching. You'll see that it has a leaf blade, right, which is the major photosynthetic portion of the protist, and you have these inflated portions which not only help it float, but it also contains special structures within it. These inflated portions are called receptacles. Inside the receptacles are these little circular or oval-shaped structures, which are called conceptacles. So you have the receptacles, and the little white dots here are the conceptacles. The conceptacles are the sexually reproductive structures. These are the structures that will produce sperm cells or egg cells. All right, let's take a close look at what a conceptacle for a male looks like. Inside the conceptacle, you have a whole bunch of little dark structures that look like, I guess, like little dashes. These are the antheridiophores. Here's a better, closer look. Inside each antheridiophore, you have sperm cells. Okay. So the terms, we use these terms, sporophyte, antheridia, etc., because when we first discovered fucus, we would just call it a plant. So plant terminology is used on fucus. Even though it's not creating pollen, we're calling them antheridiophores, right? If you know anything about flower morphology, you'd say, well, pollen is created in the anthers, therefore maybe this antheridiophore also creates pollen. No, it's creating sperm cells, right? And those are, of course, haploid. And recognize, so be able to recognize this, right? Be able to recognize this, the male conceptacle. And the female conceptacle, you have a similar situation, except it's creating egg cells in these structures called oogonium. This is one oogonium, kind of like a vase, right? You have an empty space inside, and some cells that will be creating egg cells. Okay. All right. So remember, you have the bladder which is the fucus, which has the receptacles, which are the inflated portions of the leaf blade or the lamina. And you see little white dots, which are rough to the touch, and those are the conceptacles. And the conceptacles would be a male or female. Some will produce egg cells, some will produce sperm cells in the antheridiophores, egg cells in the oogonia.